Alright, here's part 2. Now, there are many nice topics possible for Camarasaurus, and I actually had something else planned. But when the release images dropped, I've had so many comments and DMs estimating the scale or asking my opinions about it. And Zhao Chuang's making a video is interesting as well, so I thought I'd talk about this instead. Zhao Chuang states in the making of video that this is based on Camarasaurus supremus.
我们这次这个圆顶龙的模型就是以至高圆顶龙为原型进行创作的。
He bases this off 20 meters. Now here's what's interesting. You see here in the video, he's actually using the horizontal length of the dinosaur and not the true centra. However, if I estimate the horizontal length of this model, keeping the neck orientation and straightening out the tail, my estimate turns out to be 40 centimeters or 15.7 inches. For 1 to 35 scale, that works out to only 14 meters, far short of the 20 meters that PNSO has chosen. And this difference is probably due to the neck elevation angle used. Which brings me to the challenge of estimating scales in sauropods. When estimating the length, the horizontal length can give fairly reproducible approximations for certain shapes of dinosaurs. For example, ankylosaurs, stegosaurs, hadrosaurs, maybe even some theropods. Sauropods, however, are a different proposition because they have long and assumedly bendy necks and tails. If a model is based on a sauropod in a pretty horizontal attitude, like Diplodocus here, a horizontal length estimate may still give a workable, reproducible estimate between measurers. However, as soon as you have some elevation of the neck or the tail, as we see in this old Diplodocus here, you'll get different horizontal lengths. So, horizontal measurements aren't very useful, especially in macronarians with their much more vertical postures, such as Camarasaurus today. A straight horizontal length doesn't quite convey the idea of size. Now, besides the sagittal plane, any deviations from neutral in the transverse plane also results in changes to the horizontal length, as you see in this overhead view. Now, deviations are why I don't bother trying to estimate scale from a release image. Well, firstly, unless the release image is a direct side-on profile, I can't account for the angle of rotation and hence foreshortening. And even for direct side-on shots, it works only if the animal is in anatomically neutral position. Curves in a transverse plane like this confounds the measurement greatly. And that's why through center estimates are very popular with sauropods, because they tend to be more consistent regardless of curvature or posture, and it's the measure that I favor. Now, of course, as the PNSO video shows, it's important to check if the references you're using specify if it's through the centra or the horizontal length. Now, my go-to nowadays is this book, and in here, Camarasaurus lentus is 16 meters or 52.5 feet, and Supremus is 20 meters or 65.6 feet through the centra. Using these measurements against my 46 centimeter estimate, I get 1 to 35 for lentus and 1 to 44 scale for Supremus. So here's what I often do. Now, I'm sure there are better ways, and one of my friends who's super anal about estimates would probably impale me for what I'm going to do here. Now, estimating the true central length on a model can only be a best guess estimate, because the centra lie inside the animal, some distance under the overlying tissue. So, simply going over the top isn't satisfactory, because the more undulating the surface profile, the further away you get from true central length. So what I do is I take a piece of string, then I go a little off the side where the surface undulates less. I try to imagine where the center is a little bit. This also lets me follow the curves instead of clumsily trying to follow along with a straight ruler, which I used to do years ago. And I measure the length against a tape measure. Now note that the string you use makes a difference, For example, raffia string like this is quite inelastic, so I like this. On the other hand, something more elastic like this shoelace will stretch, and so introduce other errors. Now, if you're keen or desperate enough to estimate the length with an image, I'd suggest getting one that's as close to the straight side-on profile as possible, and use a string to measure along where you think the center would be, instead of trying to pivot with a ruler. And of course, you may have a method that works for you. For example, here's someone with obviously more brains than I do. You can see that Mr. Wagner here, just using a release image, was able to estimate a through center of 45 or 46 centimeters, which is exactly what I estimated from the actual model as well. And for increased accuracy, it may be useful to consider the speed of rotation of the Earth, the gravitational pull of Jupiter, and the current phase of the Moon. Now let's get to the comparisons. The most obvious comparison, of course, is the Haolonggood Camarasaurus. Now, the first thing I'll note is that they're about the same size, or more accurately, they have the same through central length. Now, both are bulky, but the PNSO takes it in sheer volume. If I were to make a blanket statement, I'd say that in terms of color, I prefer the Haolonggood. In terms of the form, I find the PNSO more pleasing. The PNSO showcases the features you'd associate with Camarasaurus. The skull isn't shrink-wrapped, and in fact, the inflatable sac gives it even more of a fleshed-out appearance than the Haolonggood. And for some, having the teeth slightly exposed just a bit above the edge of the ramphatica, as suggested by Wiersma, could be a bonus. The eyes are less cartoony, though I really like the color in Haolonggood's eyes. Detail-wise, you can judge for yourself as I take you down the neck. The scale details are both very good. I don't want to say that one is superior to the other. But the PNSO is more, shall we say, subtly sculpted. There's a fineness, perhaps I could say refinement, in the PNSO that the Haolonggood doesn't. But this may well be due to deliberate preference in the aesthetics by Haolonggood. When it comes to the color, both have their merits, but I still prefer the Haolonggood. There's a lively vibrancy that I really love here. Although if you preferred something more conservative and maybe more realistic, then the PNSO is your choice. But I'm really won over by details of the sculpt by PNSO, such as the incredible thickness of the neck that's seldom captured in models. The PNSO is also a much broader animal throughout, and very considered thinking, such as the flattening of the footpad of the support leg and the bulging out in the lifted one. Details like the kink in the base of the tail in the PNSO. In the Haolonggood, the kink appears to be posterior to where it should be, near the sacrum. And of course, I love the action-packed dynamism of the PNSO, so in terms of the pose, the PNSO wins for me. Now my conclusion is that both are very good models, but if you twisted my arm and held me at gunpoint to choose one, I'd say it's the PNSO. Otherwise, if you have to choose, just go with either. The one you like better is the right one for you. They're both very good models. Next, we have the Wild Safari. For years, my favorite Camarasaurus. This one is a bruiser, but compared to the PNSO, it's like a baby brother. I just love the dynamism in this model, and in this sense, both these models pair up very nicely together, in terms of the mood they generate. Now a quick look at the Carnegie Collection Camarasaurus. We've discussed some of the shortcomings in this model, but it's still a nice one to have. Compared to some other genera, Camarasaurus is so well known that despite some minutiae, the general idea hasn't changed much over the years. Now I think it's appropriate to look at the PNSO Alamosaurus. Both are macronarians and have that marvelous thick neck that I never thought I'd see in a model. The really cool thing is that the Alamosaurus is on a smaller scale, and so the scales on the torso are therefore appropriately smaller than on our Camarasaurus today. If the scales were the same size, it would still be good, but being PNSO, it really respects the fact that the smaller scale model should have smaller scales, or in some areas, has skin that even appears smooth. Our attention to detail is what contributes to PNSO's pedigree. Next, let's look at the Camarasaurus compared to Haolonggood's macronarian, the Alamosaurus. Haolonggood really has the most pleasing color palettes, and it's so exciting that the 1 to 35 sauropod line is a gift that keeps on giving. But at least we now have an offering from PNSO in the same space today, if you consider this 1 to 35. Here's the Haolonggood Apatosaurus. The Rebor Diplodocus. The PNSO Stegosaurus. The PNSO Saurophaganax. And of course our size comparators, Wilson and Cameron. So that's it for the PNSO Camarasaurus. Now these days, the wheels of PNSO grind excruciatingly slowly, but they grind exceedingly fine. And while it seems to be standing still this year, reports of its demise are very much exaggerated. And though appearances are few and far between, PNSOs tend to set off a fiery explosion when they do appear, so I'm very delighted once again. In terms of the detail, new paint choices, the anatomical beauty and accuracy, PNSO has again delivered, and on an herbivore, and what's more, a sauropod, and what's more, a 1 to 35, if you consider this lentus, and I couldn't be happier. Now let's get to some herbivores big time PNSO and show us more of what you could do. I'd be most curious to see if they'll finally offer us a large 1 to 35 sauropod, but this is at least a very good start. Let me know what you think, and I'll see you in the next video.